Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our annual Royal Highland Show breakfast briefing. Now, of course, in more normal times, we'd have spent the last half hour or so chatting over coffee and bacon rolls, and I certainly hope that that'll be the case next year. My name is Hamish Lean. I'm Head of Rural Property at Shepherd and Wedderburn, and it's a great pleasure, along with our event partners, Bidwell's Chartered Surveyors, to host this online seminar as part of the Royal Highland Showcase. The title of our panel discussion today is Sustainable Agriculture: How can responsible land use address the climate crisis? I'm joined by an expert panel consisting of Sarah Jane Lang, Chief Executive of Scottish Land and Estates. Sarah lives on her family farm in the Scottish Borders. Her policy objectives as Chief Executive include developing a post-Brexit land use policy, which develops resilient businesses and thriving rural communities and increased environmental resilience. She's joined by Andrew Connan, Vice President of NFUS Scotland. Andrew runs a small commercial sheep flock in Aberdeenshire and has been a member of NFU for the last 20 years. The last member of our panel is Andy Turnbull, Head of Natural Capital and Sustainable Investment at Bidwell's. This is a live event, and you are able to ask questions of the panel as the event takes place. On the right-hand side of your screen is a question box. Please type your questions there, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the course of the morning. We also have a number of online resources which are available, both from ourselves at Shepherd and Wedderburn and Bidwell's, and once again, those can be accessed on the right-hand side of your screen. The event is set to last for an hour and we'll aim to finish promptly at 10:30. So, sustainability in Scottish agriculture amid the climate crisis, with ambitious aims for a net carbon target within the next decade or so. What can Scottish agriculture do to achieve that? What are the threats that exist at the moment? I'm hoping that we'll have a lively discussion this morning on all of those issues. And I think we'll just jump right in. And I'd like to begin with you, Andrew, if I could ask you about the current impact of climate change on Scottish agriculture and how the sector is responding and how it might respond in the future.
Thank you, Hamish. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Climate change is a massive topic for our industry at the moment, and NFUS is committed to being an industry leader on climate change. Climate change is and will be creating more extreme weather events. For example, once in 200 years floodings are now happening on a regular basis. Adaptation will be key, adjusting farming systems to be more resilient physically and financially. I strongly see agriculture as being a part of the solution and not the villain in the climate change debate. Most of the impact currently stems from policy and actions to tackle climate change. However, Scotland's farmers and growers are becoming disillusioned and deflated at the continued unjustified and unproven criticisms of our industry as regards climate change. We need to dispel the myths, work on facts, and base actions on independent scientific evidence. We do produce emissions, but we also sequester carbon. Governments need to understand not only the outputs and emissions from agriculture, but also all the good in carbon sequestration that our industry does. We need accurate measurement of emissions and sequestration. It would appear that Agriculture 3 is evolving as the main carbon calculator, which needs to be able to measure sequestration and thus give a better balanced summary for agriculture. So at the moment, agriculture is mainly being judged on emissions and not sequestration. Whilst let's take forestry, for example. Forestry is being judged in sequestration without taking account of emissions. So for starters, where is the level playing field? The Scottish Government in particular is hell-bent on planting trees to tackle climate change. Last year, 83% of all new tree plantings took place in Scotland within the UK. And with Scottish Government's target of 12,000 hectares a year currently rising to 18,000 hectares a year by 2024-25, we're seeing a huge challenge to Scottish agriculture and land use. I'm getting several calls a week from despairing farmers and crofters who are losing or about to lose land to trees. This takes in lowland, upland and hill farms, as well as parts of, and in some instances, entire estates. This in turn is creating a huge threat to tenants and new entrants, and also the critical mass of our industry. The net result will be offshoring of our emissions and food imports. However, the industry has and will continue to address the issue of climate change, be it via new technologies, animal breeding, crop breeding, new crops, soil management, precision farming, methane inhibitors, and so on. NFUS has been instrumental in setting up the farmers-led groups, along with former Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing, which were designed to identify solutions to future agricultural funding, to production and climate change issues. The outcomes from the groups is something we would expect the Scottish Government to implement. In addition, the planting of small areas of trees forming shelter belts and wildlife corridors can also assist in our efforts. And in doing so, Scotland's farmers and crofters can continue to fulfil the three key objectives of producing quality, sustainable food, looking after the environment and biodiversity, and also tackling climate change. Thank you.
Andrew, thanks very much for those comments. Some of them reflect a question that was submitted earlier on from one of our audience members, which was about balancing tree planting targets with sustainable food production. And I wonder if I could turn to you, Andy, now for a view on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hamish, and great to be here and co-hosting the event with Shepherd and Wedderburn again. I think if you look at the numbers Andrew quoted there, 12,000 hectares per annum, raising to 18,000 hectares per annum in Scotland, the rough grazing and grassland area in Scotland amounts to about 5.85 million hectares. So if 18,000 hectares per annum were to be planted, that is the equivalent of 0.31% of that land area. And if that is to be planted every year for the next 26 years, it amounts for 8% of the total grassland and rough grazing area. So there's a huge presumption against planting ground better than 3.2 in agriculture. And I would flip it on its head, rather than seeing it as a threat necessarily, as seeing it as an opportunity, a way for land managers and farmers to diversify their revenue streams, produce some other products, and that in turn can make their businesses more resilient.
Thanks, Andy. I wonder, Sarah Jane, if I can turn to you and SLNE's perspective derived from members about the impact of climate change at the moment in Scottish agriculture.
Thanks, Hamish, and thanks for having me this morning. I actually had a wee spiel all prepared, but to be honest with you, I think I'm just going to wing it and kind of pick up on some things that Andrew and Andy have already said. I mean, as Andrew said, farmers and land managers are feeling the direct impact of climatic change on everyday working practices. You no longer know exactly, when you'll be carrying out the things that you always thought you did at certain times of the year. I mean, the kind of standing joke down in Kelso was, certain things were always done before Border Union Show Saturday. But, the weather's changed. It's going to continue to change. We have to think about how we're planting, how we're growing, thinking about how we accommodate that in everything that we do. But there's external forces. The market is asking us to make a change in terms of how we're producing food and fibre, how we're managing the countryside. Politics and societal change and pressure, we can't shy away from that. We as a sector are being asked to make a contribution to addressing not just climate change, but also biodiversity and natural capital challenges that we currently face. And for me, it's all about balance, and for SLE, it's all about balance. I don't think there's much to be gained, I have to say, by this kind of competing for land use It's not sheep or trees, it's sheep and trees. We have to think strategically across the whole of Scotland at a regional land use partnership level, landscape scale, as well as think about what we're doing in our on our own holdings. Andrew mentioned metrics, and I do think, Hamish, it's one of the things that we do have to think about in terms of how the sector responds. I think one of the failings that we have just now are the siloed metrics that we have, where on-farm small-scale renewables aren't always included in the agriculture box. So some of the measures that our farmers and land managers have already taken are being disregarded when you look at what the sector is doing to combat climate change. And we don't look at the whole supply chain measures, and we don't look at dare I say the offshoring of some of the emissions of a change in diet or a change in other uses. So for us, it's all about kind of, dare I say, stepping back, taking that balanced, integrated land use approach, not getting into arguments about trees and farming. I think there's room for it all. As Andy actually said, we can accommodate more tree planting in Scotland, the right tree, the right place, and we can accommodate some changes in farming practice that could deliver for nature and for the climate, but more importantly, could actually deliver viable farming businesses. And we've all heard that line, it's hard to be green when you're in the red. And one thing we can't forget in all of this, Hamish, is what has to underpin Scottish farming are viable farming businesses, as well as meeting national and international climate change targets.
Hamish, can I
just come back in there, please, just briefly?
Yeah. So Andrew, yes, please, and then we'll turn to you, Andy.
Thank you. I just think absolutely there's room for trees. There's room for varying land use, but we need balance, and that's that word balance. It's balancing productive agriculture and having trees in the right place. But balance it also means we need the argument. We need to understand the scientific evidence there, sequestration versus emissions in forestry, as has been challenged in agriculture. That's a must. Facts are now coming out, that 3 crops of Sitka on land and the land will be rendered redundant. What are we laying out for future generations in the years and the centuries ahead, potentially be destroying our landscape? We need balance, but we also need balance as regards a financial footing as well. As long as favoured terms for planting trees, including grant funding and tax-free timber production is there, then it's going to skew the balance, and it's making agriculture unable to compete. Another thing, I was in Argyll last week, and I saw firsthand how green hilltops lie abandoned above the tree line, as forestry has taken no account of leaving livestock corridors. Work hand in hand, plant trees in some areas, and if it isn't even some of the better areas, through the choice of the landowner to sell some land, leave access to the hills so that farming and forestry can work hand in hand, and in doing so, help the biodiversity and the nature of our landscape. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Andy, I know that you want to come in here.
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. I'm being cautious not to get drawn into the sort of debate that we're trying to avoid today in terms of trees and farm grazing or that. But I thought it'd be just to go back to what is the current impact of climate change on Scottish agriculture, and just to help set the scene again a bit more in that, a lot of this policy is coming from the UK government's Committee on Climate Change. That has been a pretty robust process based on lots of scenario planning. And the result of that is that all sectors of the economy and society are under scrutiny. So it's not just land use that's being challenged to look again at how its practices are carried out. So we are talking about agriculture and land use today, but everyone's under the same level of scrutiny. So I don't think anyone's being singled out. I think, what does it mean? It means that the UK government and the Scottish government have increased their planting targets. if we don't meet other emissions reductions targets, that will increase further, those planting targets. We've also got good targets set in place to restore degraded peatlands. And yes, as Sarah touched on, there are recommendations based on their scenario planning to reduce consumption of dairy and meat by 20%. And this is a very influential committee. So I think we just need to be aware of that this, I would suggest these policies are here for quite a while, but also let's not shy away from the problem that we have got a very short time window to make changes and take action if we are to keep greenhouse or to keep global temperatures within the 1.5 degree to 2 degrees Celsius temperature raises. And if you look at the recent Descriptor report on the economics of biodiversity, what we've been doing, business as usual, has not worked. We've degraded our biodiversity in the last 20 years by 40%, and the UK as a whole is in the lowest 12% of countries for biodiversity, because it's only retained around half of its biodiversity over the years, and the only countries in a worse biodiverse state than us are Ireland and Malta in the European Union. So we do need to all come together to think about how we can improve the situation, because, as I say, I don't think business as usual is an option for us or future generations.
Hamish, can I just add to what Andrew said? Andrew, I totally agree about the need for more science as well. I don't think there's enough known about soil carbon sequestration. I don't think there's enough known about the impact of changes to grazing practices. And when it comes to efficiencies, it's hard to think of anything more efficient than the ability of Scotland's sheep and cattle to turn grass into food. So I think Andy's right. The Climate Commission and the Climate Change Committee has looked at lots of science, but I think there's still some work to do. And what isn't really known yet is the exact impact or the long-term impacts of small changes. And I think that's what a lot of farmers are looking for. It's if I can liken it to energy performance certificates in houses. You had a standard methodology, but we all know that the methodology which underpinned it was flawed. It was telling us to do certain things to our houses, which in the long term weren't the right things to do. So we have to just make sure that what we're being told to do in terms of changing our farming practices are the right things for nature, are the right things for climate change. And there's some fantastic stuff going on. Regen Ag's been around for ages, but it's getting more and more recognition. And everyone here, Hamish has talked about balance, and that's what this is about. It's about balance. Healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy animals, healthy people, and it's that whole that balance of everything. And I do worry that as it often happens, we get into polarized debates, and it's bringing us back into that kind of balance of how do we come together to deliver it from a finite land supply. And unfortunately, that will require changes. It will require changes in practices, and it will require changes in land use. And I say unfortunately, for some that's an opportunity. So maybe it's fortunately, that we're at a stage where we can, as Andy said, keep doing the same things as we've done for decades or centuries. We do have to make changes.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. Andy mentioned an interesting point, which is the recommendation of the Climate Change Committee of a reduction in dairy and meat consumption of 20%. And that catches very well the concern of a number of people who have submitted questions today, which is about the apparent attack on red meat consumption. And I wonder if panel members see that there is a place for Scottish produced red meat that can be demonstrated to be of a high quality and produced in a sustainable way, perhaps not possible in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Hamish, absolutely. And if I'm honest, I think the cut red meat is an oversimplistic, I'm going to use that terrible term, virtue signaling at times. You know, that kind of just, it's an easy win for some people who are looking to kind of show their credentials. But, you know, and I think we need to be very clear about what the red meat and the Scottish game meat sectors can offer in terms of nutrition, biodiversity and climate. But I do think we need to start moving towards a more sustainable, healthy, climate-friendly diet. But for me, that means with Scottish red meat at its heart. And as you say, if you look, we talked earlier about, you know, our grassland and our grazing. I think we in Scotland have the ability to be the world leaders in the production of climate-friendly red meat.
Andrew, I wonder what your view would be.
Yeah, thank you, Hamish. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Scottish and British agriculture has much to offer in producing sustainable red meat. You know, we've got the climate to do it. We've got the stock to do it and the landscape to do it. And I think sustainable food production is part of you know, the combined aspect of looking after our environment as well and addressing climate change. In the last couple of years, we've been, you know, under massive attack from various organisations, but you know, the evidence is starting to come out now. You know, that the red meat production, the red meat sector, is a lot more carbon friendly than most. The carbon footprint of British beef and lamb is a lot less than the global average, much less, in fact. And we've to hang on to that idea. So, so the question is, do we you know, continue to offer quality food from our Scottish landscape, or are we going to allow our industry to be decimated and haul you know, livestock and meat products in from countries where, you know, there's different welfare standards and different environmental standards? I'm sure that will maybe come up later on as regards trade deals and things, but massive opportunities there. And I don't know, we'll touch on it later, but you know, the science is now coming through that red meat production and eating of red meat is a healthier option than has been led to believe from a nutrition aspect, as much as anything. So lots to go for, and our country has a lot to offer, and putting you know, quality food on the table of our consumers.
So this is the real dilemma, isn't it? Because obviously, against a background of a growing world population and a hungry population, people need to eat, and red meat is popular. In other countries of the world where meat is produced in a much less sustainable way at heavy environmental cost. The difficulty is balancing that demand and promoting sustainable production. And just picking up on a point that's been made a couple of times about not just offshoring emissions, that we can wear a halo at home on the basis that everybody else is increasing their carbon output and following unsustainable pressures. It moves us neatly on, I think, to the next bullet point of our discussion this morning, which is sustainable agriculture in Scotland against a changing international trade backdrop. And I read an interesting comment this morning from an advisor to the Board of Trade, which was that no tariff, no quota trade would be a disaster for UK agriculture without proper payments for public goods. And I wonder how the panel see the developing international trade environment, particularly in light of the recent Australian trade deal, and what pressure that will put on UK and Scottish farmers in particular, and whether the economic forces that come into play will drive farmers towards less sustainable rather than more sustainable farming practices. Perhaps we'd kick off with you, Sarah Jane, on that topic, please?
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. I mean, do you know, for me, I suppose the missing part of the jigsaw often is consumer behaviour. Because although we're talking very much about, you know, the trade deals at macro level and the producers, I think a lot of this depends on consumer behaviour, Hamish, and, you know, whether we as producers can kind of hang on to quite a lot of what increased during the lockdown, which was a kind of focus on local food production and understanding about, you know, buying maybe less but better, or looking at, you know, local food miles, as opposed to what we all know is that, you know, that a large bulk of consumers are driven primarily by or purely by price. So when they're making the decisions and, you know, in their shopping basket every week, it's about price. And if the playing field is not level, which means that, you know, Scottish and UK producers are required to meet higher standards so that they can't produce meat which can be sold at the same price as cheaper imports, then we have to rebalance that playing field. I don't think we rebalance that playing field by stripping away all the standards that we have. I do think there are efficiencies we can make within our sector now that, you know, we can operate out with CAP, but we have to, in my view, make sure that what we're importing is required to meet the same standards, and also when we're looking at the measurements, back to the kind of metrics, that we're not just measuring things when they land in Scotland. You know, we're looking at carbon accounting in the whole supply chain, and for me that includes the transport, you know, element of it. You know, bringing it, flying it, shipping it, whatever you do halfway across the world. So there's all of those things, Hamish. It's so complex, but I suppose at the bottom of it, it's a request for a level playing field in terms of producers and better marketing and messaging to our consumers, so they know exactly what they're choosing, they know exactly the implications of those choices, and hopefully they make choices which are about sustainable, quality local produce.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. Andrew, I'm sure that you'll have a view on this, and I'd be particularly interested in your view on the role that government can play to help Scottish farmers operate on a profitable basis whilst maintaining standards and increasing sustainability.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Are you still focusing on the international trade as well? Yeah. There, I'm sure.
Yes, please, Andrew.
Yeah. I mean, you know, as I already mentioned, you know, our industry is there to produce food and look after the environment and tackle climate change, and by doing so, we are providing public goods. But we need to have money to reinvest, and I think it's worthy to highlight that Scottish agriculture supports 75,000 businesses and 360,000 jobs in the food and drinks industry. Our industry is the bedrock of the Scottish economy, and in particular the rural economy depends on a vibrant sector. And these trade deals pose a massive threat to our industry. You've seen the coverage, and it's not just the Australian deal, it's a cumulative effect of future trade deals. Are other countries going to accept anything less? And I think it's a disgrace that the much promised Trade and Agricultural Commission, which was to be set up to vet and scrutinise these deals, has still yet to be implemented. An absolute disgrace. And last year, over 1 million members of the public signed a petition to demand that imported food would meet our high health and welfare standards of this country. You know, we can't compete on agricultural produce, be it cattle reared in Australia on 50,000 head feedlots, or pig units in the USA which run 100,000 pigs. We can't compete on that type of scale when our production systems are geared to producing food and also looking after our landscapes. It just doesn't work. So we need to see sustainable agriculture as being a unique selling point. And we are not a stack it high, sell it low commodity producer. We've taken account of the total offering that we offer Scotland and the UK, be it landscape and biodiversity and nature. In addition, we need to use our environmental credentials to our advantage as regards new export markets. That is essential. As regards government, there's a lot we need to be doing. We need to get targeted support based on actions, not areas, and enabling legislation, to allow us to farm based on evidence and science. We need to highlight the government, convince the government as to true facts, get rid of the myths, and push on with the job. We need support going forward. We need support to adapt to, the climate change objectives, to help us invest in things, to take up new technologies and whatever. And we also need financial assistance if we're going to be trying to competing with, foreign produced food. A massive opportunity for the government is to allow us to add value within our industry by investing in stainless steel and processing capacity. We've got lots to do, but I think a government, UK and Scottish government, we need to take a common sense approach to future policy, be it in climate change, be it in food production, be it in trade deals, and ensure impact assessments are done at an early stage with detailed investigations and consultations in order to prevent any unintended consequences. So, thank you.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Andy, can I turn to you, please, for your views
on what government can do to help?
Well, I think, first of all, looking at the challenges to sustainable agriculture in our changing international trade environment, and then perhaps thinking about what government might be able to do to help farmers.
Yeah, so as Sarah said, farmers are producing produce, and you're at the mercy of your buyers to an extent. And if the public are being driven by price, then perhaps you don't need to compete with a commodity that you can't compete on. So that's maybe the opportunity to shift gears slightly and really focus in on delivering other goods that the public or the people demand. And that's where I see the opportunity with say carbon finance. Carbon offsets, for example, are going to be in huge demand. You've got other biodiversity aspects that people are looking to be delivered, and where the deal is to support and make businesses viable, you're in receipt of public funding, and with that comes you're to an extent beheld to the policies and the desires of the government and the public. So there's an opportunity there, I think, to shift gears slightly and really go into these topics we're discussing. How can I produce more carbon on my farm? How can I produce more biodiversity? And that becomes a big part of your output.
I think, Hamish, we've talked about markets, and I think that's one of the biggest things is producers understanding their markets. And I think there's lots for the government to do to support farmers and primary producers to understand what it is that consumers are looking for, understanding the kind of supply chain, where they fit in, looking at opportunities to change that. But Andy, I was thinking, we talked a little bit about efficiency, but if you look at, we talk about trees, but if you look at how much Scotland and UK imports in terms of timber, and how our current timber producers have to I suppose compete with that import market, they've had to adapt. And I suppose the reality is that there will have to be some efficiencies to be in the farming system, as well as that kind of level playing field to be able to compete on this market in the same way that timber producers have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on it before, and we've touched on it. All panels have about offshoring our emissions. We're so guilty of that as a country, whether it's our electric cars, the minerals, the heavy metals that go into those batteries, our iPhones, all that sort of stuff. The UK is importing 80% of its timber. So we only produce 20% of our timber. So again, I see an opportunity there to integrate woodlands of all types into your business, and you're producing a product that is forecast to triple. You know, the demand is going to increase threefold in the next 10, 20 years. So that's a product that you can also produce. And yeah, I think, you know, I don't see, back to the sort of slightly moving into the biodiversity territory as well, you know, I don't see all livestock as part of the problem at all. You know, anecdotally, you know, if we are looking at sites to plant new woodlands on, if that site has you know, been grazed pretty hard by sheep, for example, we're usually pleased, because the vegetation habitat surveys and the breeding bird surveys come back that the sites are relatively ecologically beige. But if those same sites are grazed with, you know, some of our older breed cattle, the Highlanders, ling cattle, shorthorn, then there's huge. You can see the difference in the biodiversity, and that really, you know, that actually is sites that we, you know, you'd want to avoid for tree planting. So you know, integration of, or slightly switching gears with livestock systems is going to have a huge impact on biodiversity as well, and are part of the solution, not part of the problem. So it's a slightly different beef that you might be producing, or protein from those upland areas. With the sheep flock reducing, there might be an increase in the cattle herd.
So that's an interesting point, Andy. Is this all about joined up thinking and cooperating, and all sides of the industry trying to look at the bigger picture? Is that too simplistic a way to look on things?
Hamish, I don't think it is too simplistic. You know, Scottish Land and Estates and others have been calling for some time for, you know, integrated land use policy. You know, it's not farming policy, forestry policy, transport policy, you know, nature policy. It's integrated land use policy. I think what's hard, though, is to sometimes translate the kind of high level integrated land use policy into holding decisions, you know, decisions you're making on your own farm or croft or estate. And I think that's where government can help. And, you know, getting away from, dare I say, greening options to you know, greening options and support for people who can actually make proper changes on their farms and crofts and estates that do make a difference to nature and biodiversity, but are worthwhile to them as well as farmers and land managers. So yeah, for us, it's all about integrated land use. That I see, you know, the regional land use partnerships, if they were done properly, could give us a real framework for having that kind of more joined up approach. But we're not seeing that really from government yet. I don't think. It's something that actually SLE were criticised for last year for calling for this kind of long-term joined up integrated land use policy and vision. But I think we need to move, and we need to move fairly soon on that.
Yeah, we're talking about nature today, Hamish, and I think it's, you know, I was thinking about this, and if you take a lesson from nature as well, you know, there are some species in nature that are very specialized. You know, they really home in on what they're doing, and they can do it very well. But as soon as there's a change and a shock to the system, they don't do so well. And some of the best things in nature, the most resilient, are the generalists, and they do lots of different things, and they're able to adapt and survive the new situations. And I think that's what we're talking about here. It's more diversity, even on a micro level. So that could be, you know, moving away from single species grass to more diverse grass mixes. You know, it's integration in the landscape, joining up habitats, and these things, you know, back to what government can do, because we're moving about a little bit, but these transitions are going to take time as well. So if you're, you know, moving to a regenerative agriculture system, that's going to take a number of years for the soils to start getting more life back into them, start putting down organic matter. So government and financial, you know, private institutions, financial big banks, I'm sure there's some folk from banks on today on the call, they are really keen on investing in nature, but they need to provide that support for that transition. Because if the farmer, as we've touched on before, if he's to make that change, it's going to put him into the red straight away, because it's going to take 4 or 5 years for his soils to become more productive again, so he can use less fertilizers and inorganic inputs. He needs a buffer there and some certainty that there's some long-term support to enable that transition. So that's where I think private banking institutions might be interested, as well as government, to provide that longer-term view that isn't, I've got to manage my costs this quarter, next quarter, when I'm going through this huge transition for my business.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, Andrew, could I invite you to express views on Sarah, Jane and Andy's comments, please? Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, massive subject, we could talk for hours on a lot of this. I mean, where do we start, really? Sarah mentioned regional land use partnerships, and that's been mentioned for a couple of years now, but Scottish Government has been very slow in pushing it forward. I think it may offer, ideas and opportunities. However, it's like everything in balance. We need to make sure there's balanced, individuals on these partnership committees and things. We must have people who understand the environment, who understand the landscape, who are land managers. We need that type of people on there, because this could be generation, changing consequences out of this. So there are opportunities, but we'll be very careful that we don't just set up, dare I say, new quangos with people making decisions who are, probably not connected enough with Scottish land use, be it agriculture, forestry, or anything else. Andy speaks about, regenerative agriculture, and we need to fully understand that some of these terms are now new. Regenerative agriculture is just good old common farming practice. And yeah, there is monoculture appeared in some areas, intensive arable sectors. But we have to also highlight the fact that some ground is already carbon saturated in some industries, be it livestock sectors like the dairying and whatever. So there's a balance. There's opportunities across soils. No, each sector has a different thing to offer in the climate change argument. I think that's essential. And it's getting balance, and the words diversification, and it sometimes frustrates me, to be honest. If you're in a farming in the west coast of Scotland, as I witnessed last week, there's very little to turn to, and to say you'll replace sheep with cattle is pretty naive when a lot of that territory can sustain sheep and nothing else, and there's not a lot of other options there. And a classic example being that, yes, there's tree planting going on there, but allow access to the green hilltops so that agriculture can work hand in hand with other land uses going forward. But the industry has much to offer, but we all need to realise, governments included, just how much that land use and agriculture is already doing for the climate change, biodiversity and environmental issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Now, moving slightly away from that discussion, one of the questions that's been put to us is how will the potential for monetising carbon capture affect land management in Scotland? And how does the panel, or what does the panel think about carbon capture and turning it into a commodity that landowners can actually make money from?
I'm happy to start on that one, Hamish.
Thank you, Andy. Yes.
Yeah, the rise in demand for carbon from corporates and investors and business over the past 12 months, 24 months, I would go as far as to say it's transformational to rural land in Scotland. we're involved in about 1 million acres of land in Scotland, all forms of land use, and the conversations and work we're doing with some landowners, as I say, it's transformational, and it is allowing activities which are great for biodiversity, which are great for the climate change agenda to take place that were previously not financially viable to do. So if I take large-scale native woodland creation, and this is on bits of hill that are, generally very unproductive. Maybe there are running some sheep there, but it'll be low productivity. It's not producing the lamb that the proper green hills will in Borders and Aberdeenshire. And these woodlands are now generating great financial revenue streams through the monetization of carbon. And again, the same for peatlands. Peatlands generally, would be seen as the least productive element of any land holding. And due to the way we have collectively managed them in the past, we've degraded about 80% of them. They're a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions at the moment, but now there is such interest to improve those peatlands that the government is going to pay you almost 100% of the cost to do the work to improve the conditions, and then you can sell or monetize carbon credits from those peatlands as well, which now turns these pretty low value land areas into potentially carbon gold mines, if you want to use that term. So it is really transformational. I think it's going to provide a lot of options to a lot of different land managers. And as the science and technology behind monitoring soil carbon improves over time, then for agricultural businesses in Scotland, arable businesses and livestock businesses, there's probably going to be a source of revenue there from carbon finance as well. And that's probably in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Andy. Sarah Jane, can I turn to you?
I mean, I would agree with Andy about it being transformational, and I think there's been an awful lot of focus on carbon storage in trees and woodland. But as Andy mentioned, the peatland market, the peatland carbon market is maturing. The demand is there, and soil carbon market is there. So this isn't just about planting trees. This is about every land manager thinking, do I have something which I can bring to market? I think, Andy, one of the things that concerns me is the ability of individual land managers to access that market. And what we're seeing just now are big players being able to operate at a big scale. But I think there's lots that we need to do in terms of either cooperatives or markets or vehicles to market being set up for individual land managers and crofters and farmers who are then able to access this market. Because Hamish, I'm a little bit concerned that what we do is kind of have a sort of two-tier system where only the big players are able to access this huge amount of money. And Andy's absolutely right. There are billions of pounds worth of money that organisations are looking to invest in Scotland's carbon. And what we have to make sure is there's equality of access to that market. So there's something missing in terms of that market access tool that I know that Bidwells and others are looking to support smaller and medium-sized farmers and landowners access that. But back to metrics, we have to get the metrics sorted out because again, what are we selling? How is that? How is it being measured? And Andy mentioned the degraded peat and getting money to bring it back up to standard. What about the people who've looked after their peatland and their soil? Shouldn't they get something? So at the moment it's all about what's called additionality. Creating new woodland, creating improving peatland. But you've got people who have been, for decades, if not longer, looking after trees and soil and carbon very, very well. And we have to make sure that they can access a carbon market. And that is another missing piece of the jigsaw for me right now.
Thanks, Sarah. That's extremely interesting. Andrew, I wonder what your view on that and whether you would echo Sarah Jane's sentiments.
Thanks, Hamish. Yeah, agree more with Sarah Jane's sentiments than Andy's, to be fair. I feel, very strongly in this situation. And, as regards carbon capture and, land management, I think it's a hugely dangerous period we're entering. In reality, the potential for monetising carbon affecting land management is here now. The new hip words out there include carbon positive, carbon credits, carbon accounting, and you just need to look at the sales prospectuses for farms and estates for sale, and the newfound jargon is all over it. I'm sorry I may have been disrespectful, but I'm afraid, like myself and a lot of other, land keepers, farmers and crofters, thinking alike. We're already seeing lowland, and I'm repeating myself, but I need to, seeing lowland, upland and hill farms going into trees and being purchased by financial institutions and corporate businesses. 1,000 acres of arable land at Ellen there gone down to trees by a foreign investor, a Dutch lady who will have no input and pay no taxes, do no good to the local economy. Further south, another 1,000-acre arable and stock farm at Auchenblay, which has been used to supporting 300 suckler cows, 800 ewes, and 300 acres of grain. It's been sold 3 times in 2.5 years. It's been bought by a financial institution to plant trees, to enter the carbon market. With all these negative effects on productive agriculture, as already mentioned. Okay, carbon has a value, but there can be opportunities. But as an industry, we must avoid selling all our carbon book to then be told we need to cut our own emissions and perhaps our livestock to achieve net zero on our units, because we've sold off our carbon. To go down the route that will result in industry offshoring our emissions to the huge detriment of agriculture, our critical mass and our landscapes. I also think it's essential that for carbon trading, that as much as possible, carbon trading is kept within the industry and not to waste our own industry's carbon credits and its assets by passing them to other industries. You just have a look at the amount of people that's come into the land market in recent months. Huge corporates buying up land to plant trees or to get involved in peat, to tick the box, to achieve better looking carbon accounting for themselves. But what are these businesses doing to actually combat their climate change mitigations themselves? A lot of them are doing next to nothing. They're just relying and taking off agriculture. Tree planting is also happening in the best land. Andy mentioned, unproductive land, but the reality in the hills and uplands, the tree planting has gone in the good land, and the steep land is being left avoided because access to modern machinery isn't so easy. I actually I almost take exception to the word carbon gold mines. This is the type of language which, in my mind, is a huge disservice to Scottish agriculture going forward. It's causing or creating this false carbon wonderland, and I do think it's extremely dangerous, and but I think it's also creating a potential consultant's dream out there at the moment. So, and land agents' dream. So again, it's a long-term detriment of Scottish agriculture. Thank you,
Andrew. Thanks for that fairly firmly expressed view. As chairman of the panel, I wish I'd really kicked off with this discussion because it's the one that's generated the most questions in the question box. However, if I can turn to you, Andy, for a response, just picking up on some of the points that Andrew has made.
Yeah, I think a key part of sustainability is economic sustainability, and if there is private money willing to invest in land and willing to improve that from a biodiversity point of view, or to help tackle the climate change issues that we have, I don't necessarily see that as a huge issue when the alternative is for businesses to be, continue to be propped up by public funding. it's about producing an in-demand product and it's market forces. So I think there's going to be room for everything. You know, I don't think it's, I see carbon as an opportunity rather than a threat. You know, I absolutely appreciate Andrew's points on farm businesses being cautious about how they go about it. And as Sarah says, how to best access the market for smaller land holdings. But if there is demand for something that you can produce quite well as a business, then, you know, most businesses look at what's in demand and what I can produce. So, you know, I see it as a welcome addition that there is external finance coming into land management rather than relying on taxpayer funding.
Thanks, Andy. We've had an interesting question, which I wonder what the panel's views on this would be, and it's how close are we to a robust annual net carbon emissions figure for every farming business, croft and estate? Do you think that's something that's coming? Do you think that will be a tool to shape industry behaviour? Will it be a price of continuing government financial support, for example? I wonder what the panel's views are, and I wonder if I could kick off with you, Sarah Jane.
Hamish, it goes back to something that's said earlier on. Certainly for an estate or for a farming business or croft that's got a number of different activities, I think we're some way off that because of the inability to kind of look at your housing stock, your, you know, the improvements you might have made to renewables or to transport. So I think we are some way off that. But there are already tools there that can give you a robust annual figure, and you can get people in to kind of look at your whole estate. It's how that then translates, though. You know, what use is that to you, to government, to your bank? But if you look at the direction of travel, it'll have to happen very soon, because before we know it, that's what our consumers, it's what the banks, it's what the government is going to, I think, require for access to market, access to support, and for the consumer, messaging that we're going to do. So we should be closer than we are. And as Andrew said, not just looking at one side of the balance sheet, looking at the all elements, all activity. And we need to get moving on this as soon as possible. SRUC and others have done a great deal of work on looking at AgriCalc and various measures, but we're not there, I don't think, unless Andrew and Andy know better than me about this integrated land use net carbon emissions audit.
So thanks very much, Sarah Jane. We're just about bang out of time, folks. So I'd like to bring the seminar to a close. I think we've had an absolutely fascinating and very wide-ranging discussion on the various issues and challenges that the industry faces, some quite strongly expressed views, and it's just been a great debate to listen to. So I can only thank you, Sarah Jane, Andy, Andrew, for your participation today, making it such a lively and interesting event. And to all of our audience, thank you for the questions that you submitted. Hopefully, even if we didn't ask your precise question, we managed to address the concerns that you were raising. And I know that my firm, Shepherd and Wedderburn and Bidwell's, have very much enjoyed the opportunity to put this or to host this discussion, and thank you very much indeed for accepting our invitation and for your participation today. And thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much.